Chair, we're live again. Sorry for the interruption.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Let's give everyone a moment just to come back on screen. Royce, you had started to answer a question from Councillor Dudas. Since we're not sure where exactly the stream ended, could you restart your answer? Take two.
Yeah, certainly. So thank you. So there's two parts to 15-minute neighborhoods. There's the services and amenities component that we all very visually acute to, and there's also that pedestrian environment. So for service and amenities, if we look at our mapping, there's many areas within the built-up area score fairly well or have some access to service and amenities. May not be all 9 of them, but there are a few of them. So over time, what we want to do is we want to enable the conditions for new services to emerge, either through development on underutilized parcels or just redevelopment of existing parcels. So that would be very much that the traditional official plan and zoning bylaw permission-based. The second aspect speaks to the pedestrian environment, and it gets to that thing that gets away from the traditional permission base and try to beautify and make our pedestrian environments more safe, provide more pedestrian connections. And then if we also enable intensification around these areas, it also creates the market conditions for an increase of that customer base. So it really speaks to enabling, providing an environment that enables new businesses to locate in areas where it makes sense, either through new customers, there are permissions, and there's a nice and safe area connection to get to where you want to do your business.
Thank you, Royce. I very much appreciate that, because while it's certainly important that we're thinking of the newly built communities, the majority of our city is older communities, and some have amazing walkable areas with access to everything that you'll ever need, and others don't. And we need to make sure that we're not leaving anyone behind, because as we're growing as a city, whether you're living in a new subdivision or downtown or in the suburbs, I mean, all of us deserve the best quality of life. So I'm very pleased to hear that staff are taking that into consideration, and I continue to look forward to your updates as the public consultations take place. And excellent work on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you very much for these maps. They're wonderful. I'm wondering if each councillor can have an opportunity to meet with staff just to talk about the different aspects of their ward in terms of what's there and the deserts, etc. I think it'd be very productive to discuss what is seen in terms of each ward, the spots. I mean, Steve alluded to that about food deserts. I have one in Foster Farm because a giant tiger didn't want to be there anymore, and that's it. And there's nothing you can do about it. It's that total feeling of helplessness when that happens. Though we're hoping that in the future that density will change things. I particularly wanted to say thank you about the childcare facilities location. I thought that was great to have that. And I just wanted to double check on the definition of the childcare facility. Are you including ones in schools, or are you just including self-standing ones, or just wanted to check on that.
Thank you, councillors. Through you, Chair. I do believe they are captured, the ones within the schools and the standalone ones, but the schools would also be captured in their location for it being an elementary or secondary school as well. Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I can see some gaps, and I can see that this is something that we need to work on for the future, and hopefully when we hear about a plan from the Ontario government, this will be very useful. So I'm sure that Jason is appreciative of it, and the staff to get that going. Yeah, no, it's extremely helpful.
I would like to discuss an analysis by the ward just to go over what can be worked on, because as we get development applications and they include possible retail, I mean, I know intuitively, but it's good to have this data as well to show that they can play a role. And this is things that we can push for in the future. So no, thank you very much. It's a great start, and I like the suggestion of putting it on Geo Ottawa when it's possible. I get that that's complicated, but it would be very helpful. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning to you and colleagues. Thank you, staff, for this presentation. Certainly coming out of the new OP with the 15-minute neighborhood focus, there's interest. It's got people thinking about what we have, what we don't have, what we'd like to see in neighborhoods of tomorrow, and how you take a mature, already built community and evolve it and massage it further. River Ward, approaching 51,000 people. How many grocery stores do you think we have in River Ward? An urban ward in the middle of Ottawa. One. We have one grocery store, Metro in Hunt Club. There's no grocery store in Carlington, no grocery store in Central Park. We have a specialty small Italian food stop in Carlton Heights, no grocery store in Riverside Park, no grocery store in Ridgemont, and the one grocery store in Hunt Club is a Metro for 51,000 people. So we all have to drive. Yes, there are convenience stores and places where you can get milk. No libraries. There are no library branches in River Ward. And I can go through the list, but I won't. But again, if we want to make vibrant, livable, non-car dependent neighborhoods, you need amenities that people need. The doctor, the dentist, the dry cleaner, things that you list here. We had the Mooney's Bay grocery store pack up and leave a few years ago. The one in my community, small independent, couldn't get supplied by President's Choice. They didn't want to deal with small guys like him. And so he packed up and left. And again, yet another food desert when we're adding more towers in the immediate community. Anyway, let me ask my question, and that is, how can we better link mature neighborhoods that are not generating a lot of new development? They're not generating a lot of new DCs. I have this argument with the library board. We will never be able to generate enough DCs in River Ward to build a new library based on the formula that we have now, right? Because there's just not enough money being put in the pot to build that. If you look at the formula, is the 15-minute neighborhood looking at, well, we've got these mature communities which are now not generating gobs of new DCs like the suburbs are, but they need certain amenities. There are certain amenities that are absent that won't get built unless we tweak how it gets funded. Is that being considered?
So, Chair, the councillor has a very good question, but it's beyond the scope of this report. So, in all fairness to the staff who prepared the report, this is a baseline measurement of where we're at. And we've never had such a detailed baseline measurement as it relates particularly to communities like the councillors before, that really gives an overall snapshot of where the gaps are in the system. So I'm actually quite pleased with what the team has accomplished in terms of setting the baseline. In the next term of council, we're going to be talking about how council can use development charges, how council can use the new community benefits bylaw charges. Council will always have to wrestle in terms of its strategic plan and allocation of tax supported capital investment projects. This will become part of that mission for the next term of council to deal with this. And I know that, as some of these areas see new development, there will be more development charge revenue, but development charge is not, as it's currently doled out, done in an eyedropper on the ward in which it originated. It is done on a citywide basis. So if growth is truly happening on a citywide basis and population, we hit that heading towards that 1.4 or almost 1.5 million people, there will be opportunities, I'm sure, because the level of service calculation and the development charges bylaw will inevitably mean we'll need more of these facilities. So I regret that I can't give the councillor the answer he wants today. It's absolutely work in progress, but this data will help.
Fantastic. And I was not expecting a silver bullet this morning, but my role is to inform this committee. It's shocking when you look at an urban ward of 50,000. Yes, we're blessed with green space. We have community centers. We do have some amenities, but people are surprised when I say we have no library. And when you look at sort of the at-risk neighborhoods that do exist in my ward, you would think we as a city would prioritize these communities and say, thou shalt have a library. You will have a fully populated community center with programming. You will have childcare centers for your families. That those would become sort of the key building blocks of a vibrant community. So look, the report today is very good. There is strong interest. I know in my ward and across the city, I support that. And I just wanted to mention a few points that continue to be an issue in my ward. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor, for raising that. Councillor Menard.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much to staff for this report. Really interesting stuff. And, it's incredible work. Obviously, seeing this now, it gives life to the official plan. And I think had we had a bit more time, having this in advance, always useful. We are where we are, but the report is very helpful. So I guess the one question I have is for staff, based on where we're seeing the 15-minute communities that already exist and the ones that are not there, more so on the periphery. How does urban boundary expansion affect 15-minute communities in your view?
So chairs, I think it's a matter of just how we plan for those communities for new secondary plan areas would be different from how we look at existing areas. And that's part of the next steps, is to figure out how can we do that in a way so that we can advance some of the services maybe a little bit quicker than it would have been without that framework. And that's some of the next steps we have to do through our secondary planning exercises, is to figure that out.
Okay, I appreciate that. I guess the question though is like the question in my mind anyway, because that's a fair answer. It's that there's already existing suburban communities that we see all the time here that don't have those services, and other communities like Councillor Brockman was just talking about. It's a basic core community without the 15-minute concept. So if we're planning for expansion and that we build those differently than the other areas, you got to think there's only so much funding to go around. There's only so much you can provide services based on where our taxes are at. So I just find it difficult because our expansion of urban boundary to me is going to affect the services that we can't have in our suburban communities that are already existing, or in our core communities that don't have, as Councillor Brockman was saying, the services now. And I think it's imperative the committee think about this as terms of our budget and what we're doing to actually affect this change. Are we putting our money where our mouth is? Ottawa, it's difficult. We were built as around the car in the 50s and 60s. And now we have very car-centric communities. And as staff were showing in their presentation, this drastically affects the ability to have 15-minute communities when you're solely building around the car. And if we're going to shift as a city and get more efficient, we need to start thinking about not expanding our urban boundary, about building fewer and widening fewer roads, and focusing on what truly makes higher quality of life, which we've said, all of us in our official plan, is 15-minute communities. So I just think, we need to get in a better direction than we've been going so far, because the direction we're heading in does not make it easier to create 15-minute communities. It makes it much more difficult in terms of the cost of servicing. So I'll just leave that as a comment, I guess, Chair. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple questions. One of them that's going to tie into a number of themes already raised about commercial amenities and growth areas and so on. So I think the methodology that staff use here is very innovative, and the maps are interesting. But I think what's really valuable in the report also are the next steps. So in each of the transects, there's a list of recommended next steps. I'm looking at the suburban transect. One of the next steps is, it says consult with the city's community planning section to ensure or reserve land for commercial services that are accessible to residential neighborhoods and secondary plans and local plans to increase access to service and amenities. And I can see how that might be done fairly easily with new secondary plans and greenfield areas. Is there a way that we can do that, or how would we accomplish that within existing areas? For example, along arterial main streets and in existing suburban neighborhoods that might be lacking commercial or other amenities?
So, Chairs, one of the things that shifts with this new thinking of 15-minute neighborhoods, I mean, if you look at the suburbs that we started building in the 70s and really designed around town centers, and in each of the suburbs right now, we have very distinct town centers where there was a concentration of activity, and that sort of worked. But what's changing now is as those suburbs mature more, to hit 15-minute neighborhoods, we need sub-concentrations outside of those town centers. So, for example, I'll just give an example. In Canada, the town center is south of the 417, and it accomplishes an awful lot in serving that area. But if you live north of the 417, it is not necessarily that great an amenity for you because of the division of the highway. So we have to start looking at sub-centers and creating them. Our zoning on the main streets, almost exclusively is mixed use. So in a sense, the basic bones of permissions are already there. People just have to use those permissions. And I think over time, as we go into the next zoning bylaw review, we have to look again at further barriers for that happening as well. So my projection is we'll adapt our methodology over time. The benefit of this report is it gives a to-do list for us when we're opening up community planning in those areas. And it's the clearest to-do list we've had yet to help plan to go forward. These are not easy problems to solve on things like food deserts, but on things like other amenities where the city has more control of, it will actually be something that becomes a great toolbox for that.
So it's those mixed use areas on the arterial main streets that I'm concerned about, because what I'm seeing, at least in my ward, and I'm sure it's happening in other wards, we're not seeing mixed use. We're seeing one or the other. We're seeing all commercial or all residential. And right now, there's not a lot of demand for commercial for a number of reasons. There's not as strong a market demand. There's a huge market demand for residential. I see it most egregiously in an area out here called Fernbank. It's near a future transit station. That transit won't be here till at least a decade, but it's an area marked mixed use. There are 3 plots of land. The first plot is going to be residential towers. We have an application in now for residential on the second plot. That leaves 1 plot left where we could have commercial. If that's built as residential, we have lost every opportunity to have walkable commercial in the core of this new neighborhood. So are there opportunities in that zoning bylaw review to put some limits so that we don't get 100% commercial? Like, are there legal ways that we could say at least 25% of this land or this gross floor space area has to be commercial? What tools do we have to ensure that mixed use is actually mixed and not just individual sites built completely in one use?
So, Chair, in the previous zoning official plans, we had a series of zones, and in previous times, even employment designations that had mandatory minimums of uses, and it really has not worked. And in many cases, they've had to be abandoned as tools. What we're looking for at more and more in this new official plan is adaptable built form, such as, is the ground floor of that building built so that it could be different things over time? I mean, a lot of this commercial comes when the population is high enough. And if you talk to the various grocery stores, for example, they're looking at a minimum service population in order to come into an area. So, density has to get higher in order to make that happen. The neighborhood has to evolve in terms of its maturity. Even it could be designed, but it's not filled up yet. So, example, in Councillor Kitt's ward, we have lots of areas that are opening up, but they're not fully built out yet. And until they're further built out, those commercial uses won't come because they're not going to come in advance. So the more mature suburban areas are seeing it. But we struggle with this very issue about, buildings not being mixed use. I know we had many debates recently before this committee on Beechwood, for example, where we wanted more mix of uses even within buildings. And the problem is the building industry isn't there yet in terms of all the mechanisms. Very few of them will do it. Very few builders, very few lenders will participate in those types of developments. So it's changing in North America slowly. And, we don't have this one nailed yet, but it's something we continue to work on for sure.
Yeah, I think there are some developers more willing to have that conversation than others. In fact, I think the Carling Avenue item that's on our agenda today, there is space that will be kept for retail, could be a grocery store, and that was through some negotiation and encouragement of the developer to do that, but it unfortunately doesn't always happen. The other thing I wanted to ask was just in terms of a cadence for getting updates to this 15-minute report. We've got the baseline, but what is the plan? When can we expect to see the next report on any progress we're making in creating more 15-minute neighborhoods?
So chairs, part of the service amenities data comes from our employment survey. And our employment survey is done every 5 years. Supposed to be done in 2020 and was delayed with COVID. So at a minimum, the frequency would be just after we receive the results of our employment survey to answer that subset. And then we'd also have to look at the frequency of other available data. But so at this point, we're looking at a minimum of perhaps a 5-year cycle, or to tie it with how frequent we conduct our employment survey.
Okay, thanks very much. Are there any other questions on this item? All right, thanks again to staff for putting this together. It's an excellent collection of data. Another required reading for anyone interested in development in our city, for sure. Is this report received?
Received.
Thank you. Okay, before we go to item 3, we have a deferral motion for item number 5, which is 200 Baraboo Street. And I want to make sure we deal with that right away because we have a number of delegations who've been sitting patiently waiting for that item. I believe Councillor Moffat has the deferral motion. Once we get it on screen, this is for item 5, 200 Baraboo Street.
Thank you. I imagine Councillor Fleury might want to speak to it at some point, but the deferral motion is whereas the report before us seeks a zoning amendment to accommodate the construction of an 85-unit planned unit development, and whereas the ward councillor has requested that the report be deferred to the next regular meeting of Planning Committee on January 27th, 2022. Be it further resolved. Sorry. I have 2 motions. I'm going to read the one on the screen because the one on my other screen is not accurate. Therefore, be resolved the Planning Committee defer the report ACS 2021 PIEPS 0104 to the January 27th, 2022 meeting of the Planning Committee. Be it further resolved that there be no further notice pursuant to subsection 3417 of the Planning Act.
And I believe the applicant is aware and supportive of the deferral, but just looking for staff to confirm that, making sure that the applicant is aware and agrees.
I think they're aware.
Yes, Chair Gower. I believe they are aware, but I do not believe that they actually agree with the deferral that comes forward. I know the ward councillor may want to speak to that as well, but it's my understanding that they don't support it.
So Councillor Fleury, you're seeking a deferral. Would you like to comment on this?
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Chair. There are, if you read my comments in the report, there are a number of site plan elements, but there's some that aren't clear, and I apologize, but I was not able to connect with the applicant, and I'll take full blame for it ahead of this meeting. So I believe we can come to a consensus, but we do need to meet to come forward. I have been speaking with both the planner and Doug on the matter, JC and Doug. And although I believe the majority of elements are site plan, I think we could get much further along if we just had a short meeting. And I apologize to committee and the applicant. I was not able to connect with them earlier.
Okay, I see Christine McQuaig here from the applicant. I'm give you a chance to comment, Christine, before we make a decision on this. Go ahead.
Good morning, co-chairs. Thanks for allowing me the opportunity to speak. The owner of the site, Kevin McMahon, may also take an opportunity to respond. We were aware of the site plan items that we were going to have further coordination with the councillor's office as well as staff. I was not aware of the motion to defer. It's a significant amount of time, as it would be at the end of January. We would prefer to proceed today. We had provided information, certainly to the councillor, and we are absolutely on board to further discuss these site plan matters as we continue to move through the site plan process. But I feel that the zoning that's being proposed today, we've worked on those parameters and those details for the last year. And I think in terms of the zoning moving forward as it stands, is a good approach. And I don't think there's going to be any changes to the zoning amendment itself. But the issues that we can discuss further would be site plan control related issues.
Okay, so we have the motion for deferral in front of us. So are there any questions or comments from councillors on the deferral motion? Councillor Leeper, go ahead.
Thanks. I'm just wondering how shrink wrapped is the zoning? Is there a really specific schedule with respect to step backs and all that good stuff?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there's not a specific schedule, but the zoning exception provisions are specific for this particular development. The rear yard setbacks, because of the shape of the lot and the positioning of the units, it's actually sort of, there's a pinch point and then it broadens out. Mm-hmm. And so, we've made the zoning that, to be relatively tailored to this development.
Okay, thanks.
I want to ask Councillor Fleury, we have got quite a long time before this goes to council. Can we deal with the zoning today and have you deal with the site plan matters between now and council? And if there's any significant issues that come up between now and then, there might be a need for deferral at council, but
absolutely,
we're looking at 6 weeks. So
yeah, absolutely, I see no problem. And again, I'm taking full blame for not being able to connect with the applicant ahead of time on these minor things, but was looking for additional clarity, and I'm glad for the item to proceed. And I know there's a number of delegations today, and we can take it offline afterwards. So sorry for creating confusion.
Okay, yeah, no, if it was a 2 week, it might be different, but we're looking at well into the new year before, I think 6 weeks, or it's almost actually 7 weeks before we get there. So we'll set aside the motion then, and we will come back to this item. So I want to go back and keep our order of items here. So we're on item number 3. We'll go to item number 3 for the zoning bylaw amendment on outdoor commercial patios. We have a staff presentation and we have one delegation. So this is a citywide report, and I believe it's Robert Sandercott from staff with a presentation on the outdoor patios.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Actually, I'm going to provide just a verbal presentation, if you don't mind, okay. And then we'll be free to answer any questions that you might have. So where this is coming from is back on July 15th, 2020, Council passed a temporary zoning bylaw amendment to provide an extra flexibility on indoor gathering spaces, and to provide a lifeline to a wide number of small businesses across the city who found themselves in incredibly desperate straits. The uptake on this was phenomenal, particularly in terms of providing that extra ability for small businesses to expand their footprint, to provide for some extra tables and chairs to go outside, to give themselves some extra opportunity to conduct their business. And in terms of the ability for adding a little bit of extra vitality to our streets, which was sorely lacking. This was something that was widely embraced and really quite successful as it moved through. We did extend this temporary provision on January 1st, 2022 to give a little bit of extra time as the subsequent waves came through. And of course, we went through the various situations and whatnot. And as we went through this, we also looked at a monitoring process with our bylaw and our right-of-way colleagues to understand how the impact of these were happening, whether there were significant nuisance concerns occurring through this, and what the quality of life was in terms of the noise impacts, et cetera, for adjoining residents. The primary uptake for where this happened was along our main streets. And the reason that this is because along our main streets, we have a situation where there is a tight urban fabric. We have a number of small properties, small businesses, restaurants, coffee shops, patios, things like that, that are by nature of Main Street zoning, cheek by jowl with residential neighborhoods directly alongside. And so we had a number of businesses that were never allowed to have an outdoor patio before. And all of a sudden with these new regulations, they were able to put up the table and the chairs. They were able to put out some picnic tables. They were able to put out a variety of other things that made the street better. And so as part of this post-COVID recovery, we have a proposition. And the proposition we have is that this was a good thing. This was a regulatory barrier that was getting in the way of small businesses being able to improve the quality of life along our streets. This is a proposition that provides more flexibility to create more of a livable community within our city. And so what the planning department is recommending is to make those regulations permanent and move those things forward. So we are proposing to allow for patios to occur and to remove the separation distances that occur that are in place right now, remove the 75-meter separation distance where unscreened, remove the 30-meter distance where unscreened, and allow for outdoor patios to occur. Now, with respect to sensitivity, though, we understand that there is an issue with respect to a commercial development next to a residential property. And as much as there is a reasonable expectation for how to be a good neighbor, we do think it's prudent to provide some restrictions. So we are calling for those patios to provide screening and landscaping between that commercial patio and that residential district. The other restriction that we are putting into place is we are going to continue the prohibition on outdoor amplified sound. Outdoor amplified sound is the #1 issue that we have with outdoor patios, whether they are on the right-of-way or within private lots. That is speakers, amplified music, things like that that raise the decibel threshold much further up. Within 30 meters of a residential property, an outdoor commercial property will be allowed to have a patio, but they may not have an amplified sound system on that, which means that it is human voices that we are dealing with, subject, of course, to the noise bylaw as it moves forward. We are also going to allow a patio to continue to occupy required parking spaces. That has been something that has long been allowed for garden centers, for various other special events. And the planning department is of the opinion that allowing for a restaurant or an outdoor patio to take over those parking spaces is a good trade-off to make in terms of providing, again, that extra livability and that extra vitality back to the neighborhood. We will be working in conjunction with our right-of-way colleagues as they move forward with how we are going to respond for patios on the right-of-way. That is a different topic. So what we are proposing here today is to make the temporary zoning measures that have been in place for the last 2 years and make those permanent at this time. And we're happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, thank you, David. We'll come back to you for questions in a moment. We're going to go to our delegation. We have Cheryl Parrott representing the Hintonburg Community Association. Good morning, Cheryl.
Hi, just give me a minute because they just promoted me. So I just got to get everything organized here.
For sure. We also did receive a letter from Cheryl and the HCA circulated to committee members from over the weekend. So thank you.
Perfect. Okay. So, and it's mostly basically what's in the letter. So I'm just going to read a bit of it and then add some comments. But we really have concerns about the amendment. In the past, the 30-meter has worked well for us. Some patios have been created, but we've been able to negotiate some terms on it. And that has been really quite vital. In a community where everything is so very close together and is rapidly intensifying. So we are happy to see from the initial recommendation that the 2-meter high screening is going to be brought forward again. It was originally taken out, but it's important that this be a sound attenuation structure, not just a visual screening, because the wording appears to be just some screen, and you could put up a piece of lattice, which isn't going to reduce the noise from a patio at 2 a.m. On a Monday night. So many of the patios that opened during the pandemic in parking lots at the rear of buildings had limited hours and limited capacity. And so looking at that, it's not really a fair estimation of what the impact might be on neighbors whose windows are directly beside this. And so we're really concerned about what the full impact will be once things get back to full capacity, because many of those patios, they couldn't serve past 10 at certain times and that kind of thing. And we really disagree about noise bylaw will take care of everything. That, as many councillors I hope understand, doesn't work all that well. In many cases in the past, if you call in at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock at night, you get a call at 2:30 in the morning from Bylaw asking if it's still a problem. So there needs to be a better way of doing this, and just punting it to CPS doesn't seem to be adequate without adding extra resources, and you've already passed the CPS budget now. So our traditional Main Street wraps around the corners. And so we do have patios that are abutting a residential zone. And on one particular one, we were able to negotiate a good sound attenuation wall with the owner, who went through committee of adjustment. So we're also concerned about the oversight by businesses if the patios across the street or down the block, which is what is in the staff recommendations. So how do they get food and alcohol down the street? We asked AGCO what the policy would be, and they had no idea this was coming, and they forwarded it to Toronto. So still don't have an answer on that. How will the distant patios be identified if there's complaints? Are they going to have a big sign that says the address, so that if we call, if a neighbor has to call 311, they don't have to try to describe where it is and have no idea who is in charge? Will you send back, I guess what we'd like to see is that you send this back to staff to propose better mitigation measures. We like the patios. We support the small businesses. So some parts of this are good, but there's not enough in terms of mitigation that we believe that you've got in there. So the noise barriers are essential. So the wording in that should be changed to a noise barrier as opposed to a screening, which could be just a lattice. And some way for Bylaw to be able to keep up, if that's the strategy you're going to go with. You need more officers. They need to be dedicated. There needs to be some way of 3 strikes and you've got some implications on you. So please send this back to staff and ask for better measures, because this is a good thing. But if it's right under your bedroom window, what's the response other than just call 311, which is like bashing your head against a cement wall? So thank you. That's my presentation.
Okay, thank you, Cheryl. Councillor Leeper has a question for you.
Thanks, and thanks, Cheryl. And you know that I've been a fan of these Absinthe and Anthony's. The use of their parking lot for customers and eating and enjoying a wonderful summer evening is a lot better than parking cars in it. But I'm just wondering, my experience of the parking lot patios, particularly this year, was excellent. I can say the only interaction I've had with them is as a customer. Nothing has crossed my desk. Were there issues with the parking lot patios and the closer than normal patios also on other types of property in Hintonburg this year?
There was one that was further down. Yeah.
Okay.
So there were some complaints that we heard. And again, people were late. They really didn't want to have to call in noise complaints on businesses that were struggling to survive. And we all got that. There was actually two patios. One was extremely loud as I walked by on Armstrong Street. But again, people were trying to help those businesses survive. So nobody wanted to call noise complaint this year. And again, those patios often were not going very late either. And certainly, you know, if they have to apply for a new liquor permit this year for those spaces, then the community will have a chance to be able to look at possible conditions of hours of closure, as opposed to everybody leaving at 2:45 in the morning. We've been able to negotiate conditions on licenses on some of the patios that are more reasonable for both the business and for the community. But AGCO does not know what their policy will be, because last year during the pandemic, what they did was if you had a license, you could serve anywhere.
Yep.
And again, that was to help the businesses. So anyone that had a condition on their patio still had to abide by those conditions, but anyone else could serve very late. But most of the businesses were not open that late. There were prohibitions on serving alcohol after a certain hour for part of the year. It was 10 o'clock, I believe. So those conditions will now probably be gone. So serving till 2 in the morning and having people out there till 2:45 or 3 is a concern for residents that are nearby. So yeah, there were two patios that there was a fair amount of noise from. They weren't open late, but yeah, just throwing people to the 311 is difficult.
Okay. I mean, I'm supportive of the motion that's being put forward, as you know, and I would encourage you. I don't mind working with owners to see what sort of compromises we can come to. In Hintonburg, you're not going to have a lot of parking lot patios or dining room patios open until 2 o'clock in the morning, I don't think. But I'll leave it there and thank you for the presentation, Cheryl.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm seeing no other questions. So thank you, Cheryl, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Are there any questions for staff from the committee? Councillor Leeper?
So I do wonder what staff are hearing with respect to the separate licensing for patios that provide the community with leverage to work out compromises on things like hours. Prior to the pandemic, when new patios opened, that was a separate license, and that gave community associations and others a chance to work through opening hours, capacities, things like that. Do we have any indication at this point of whether the province is planning to resume that kind of separate licensing?
Chair, so I think part of the question here in terms of ability, at least on the city side, to provide conditions is there's patios on private property, which are regulated by zoning, which is what we are here to deal with today. And there are also regulations surrounding patios on the right of way, which has its own separate regulation, not being here to speak to it today. That does have its own permitting process with it. We do have right-of-way staff with us, Mark Young and Lorene DiNardo, who can maybe speak a bit to any questions on the right-of-way portion and where that's going to be going.
No, sorry, and I'm sorry if I wasn't clear. A parking lot patio such as Anthony's might add into their the back of the restaurant. In times past, I think AGCO would license the dining room separately from the patio. So if a restaurateur suggested opening a patio, they sought a separate license for that, and the community then had an opportunity to talk to AGCO and talk to the owner about reduced hours compared to the dining room, for instance. And I do take Cheryl's point with respect to treating patios differently with respect to the license than the dining room. Do we have any indication of what AGCO's approach might be with respect to separate licenses for patios versus dining rooms?
Chairs, that's something that we're more than happy to take away and take back to the AGCO. Pre-COVID, we did work with the AGCO quite extensively to work on liquor licenses and to provide for conditions. Most notably, Councillor Fleury would be well aware that we did an awful lot of that with respect to the byward market and to regulate some of the nuisance behaviors that were there. And I think that when we talk about issues of quality of life and nuisance behavior, that is a tool that's available to us. The noise bylaw is one tool, enforcement is one tool, but also our partners at AGCO are another tool. So we are happy to take that away, and we can work with the AGCO to talk about whether there might be an opportunity for us to provide some additional conditions with respect to outdoor patios that are on private lands.
Yeah, thanks. I would like that approach. It's to Cheryl's point. It's one thing to have a popular spot with a dining room where, you know, last call is at 2 a.m. I presume it's still 2 a.m. I'm sorry, I haven't been out that late in a very long time. But you know, it's one thing to have a something like Anthony's patio operating until 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock on a summer's evening versus having it open up until, you know, 2 o'clock in the morning, which is, you know, when things start to get a little bit loud. All right. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Leeper. I'm going to pass things over to Co-Chair Moffat for a few moments.
Thank you, Councillor Menard. Tough work.
Chair, my chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. Used to you chairing an environment committee, and I don't know what else is coming up next. But I'll be missing you next term, that's for sure, in all your chairing duties. So thank you, Councillor Moffat, Chair Moffat. I do want to ask staff and thank them for the report, and just also ask them about the change they made, because I think our office had a lot of feedback for you on the continued screening. And I think you've incorporated that based on a lot of the feedback that we had, and I'm sure others were giving you at the time. So that's, it used to be was it a 75 meter screen necessary, 75 meter inset? There was a screen necessary, and now it's down to 30. If you could just confirm that or clarify that. And then the other piece I wanted to ask you about is around that right-of-way piece. You mentioned separate item for parking, spaces on the road, for example, or patio spaces on sidewalks with accessibility. We had an initiative in Capital Ward that we, had a street entrance converted to a public patio. Hugely well received by residents in the area, local businesses, visitors that were coming here, and couldn't have been better received in that. So do we still have the ability to do that in the future? When will those discussions happen about the conversion of, say, on-street parking spaces, right-of-way spaces, and street conversions like we did this past year?
Thank you. Chair, I will just confirm the first question before I turn it over to our right-of-way staff for the second question. The councillor is understanding it correctly. The requirement that we're proposing to put in, which wasn't originally in the circulation, but we have been putting in based on feedback from the councillor and others, it is to continue requiring screening for any patio that is within 30 meters of a residential zone. Currently, this is the requirement that does apply for any patio that is within 75 meters of a residential zone. So currently, within 30 meters would be normally prohibited. Between 30 and 75 meters, it's permitted, but you require the screening. What's proposed now is permitted within 30 meters, and only within 30 meters do you require the screen. So I'll now turn it over to the right-of-way staff just to answer that second question. Thank you.
Sure. Through you, Mr. Chair, just in terms of the right-of-way patio innovation program, we're looking at coming forward to Transportation Committee in February with a detailed report in terms of the initiatives we're looking at taking for 2022 patio season. And glad to hear that there were successes through the 2021 season, and looking for feedback at that time. And we can reach out in advance to get a little bit more feedback in terms of what worked and what didn't work, and coming forward with the report to Transportation Committee.
And just on that, Chair, sorry, did you have a timeline on that report or estimate timeline for when it would come to Transportation?
We're aiming for February of next year.
Okay, thanks so much. Really appreciate that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Menard. Councillor Fleury.
Mr. Chair, I'd understood there were more delegations, but I did ask Councillor Leeper, who's not at his desk, to move a motion on this report. Ick, I don't know if you have a copy, and I wonder if another member of committee can move it. Its relations to noise and design consideration. So.
Yeah, we only had one delegation registered for this one.
Apologize. I thought the Lower Town Community Association was going to. So, Mr. Chair, how would officially do you want Councillor Leeper had agreed to move it? He's not here.
He's coming back. I see him right now. He's putting his headphones on. So then you'll get him in a second.
Councillor Leeper, are you okay to move the motion?
I'm sorry, I stepped away from my desk. Yes, we spoke about this previously. Absolutely.
Okay. Mr. Chair, would you like me to read, or would you like Councillor Leeper to read it?
Yeah, go ahead. You can read it, Councillor Fleury.
Okay. Whereas there is a desire to ensure that outdoor patios operate as good neighbors, particularly located near residential uses, whereas the intent of the proposed regulation is to prohibit the use of amplified sound systems for patios located within 30 meters of a residential zone, and it is necessary to account for amplified sound sources not directly located on an outdoor patio. And whereas staff recognize that this existing additional concerns with respects to the operation of outdoor commercial patios that may not be appropriately covered by zoning regulations. Therefore be it resolved that Planning Committee amend Document 1 by revising the first line of Item 1B so that it reads as follows. Where an outdoor commercial patio is within 30 meters of a residential zone, it is not permitted to be served by an amplified system, directly or indirectly, for music or entertainment purposes. Be it further resolved that there be no further notice pursuant to Section 3417 of the Planning Act, and therefore be it resolved that staff be directed to develop a good neighbor information document for outdoor commercial patios located in both the right-of-way and on private lands to cover issues related to the screening, noise, and other related operational matters for the 2022 patio season.
Okay, thanks. It's the wording of it is kind of jumbled. There should be, therefore be it resolved. And then the thing at the bottom should be it further resolved. And that should be the next thing. And then the last thing should be the Planning Act mention of the no further notice. But anyway, that's just small details. Can I just get a comment from staff on that motion, if you don't mind?
Yeah, Chair, staff are supportive of the motion. We have no concerns, and the wording changes were done in conjunction with our enforcement staff to make sure that they had the wording necessary to provide the proper intent.
Yeah, no worries. I was just saying the format of where it's the three things, the three clauses where they should be sitting in the motions. It's really tiny, small details. Okay, thank you. Any questions on the motion? Any other questions on the report? Seeing none, so on Councillor Fleury's motion.
Carried.
Carried. And on the report as amended.
Carried.
Thank you. Councillor Gower, you want to take item number 4?
Thank you, Councillor Moffat. Item number 4 is a zoning bylaw amendment for 299-291 Carling Avenue in Capital Ward. We had held this because there was a delegation. That delegation has since withdrawn. Are there any questions from councillors for the applicant or for staff? Councillor Menard, I know this is in your ward. I'm trying to determine if we can carry this or if we need to have a staff presentation on it. So
I think, Chair, if you, I think we can carry it. I'll just make 2 quick comments if that's okay, Chair.
Well, let me check with the applicant before we do that. If the committee's ready to carry this item, does the applicant wish to make the presentation or speak on it?
No, we are comfortable with this going forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Menard.
Thanks so much, Chair. I just wanted to thank Canada Lands for their cooperation here. This has been a long process for them. Started before the pandemic, working with our office, you know, and then right through the pandemic, there's been a lot of consultations held. I'm very happy to see where we've ended up here and to have a good partner like Canada Lands. So, you know, one of the biggest positives I think to come out of this is affordable housing. It's a 25-year supply at 15%. And though we didn't get all that we asked for, the applicant was willing to work with us on a negotiated solution, which, Chair, I always find is when we can negotiate and hold those community consultations up front, we always get to better results. I also think we were mentioning food deserts before. There's potential here now for to attract a grocery store based on how we've worked through the ground floor commercial, the zoning. And so really appreciate, you know, Canada Land's work with us on that as well. This is an area that is quite frankly a food desert and needs that type of support here. So I hope in the future when these lands do get developed, that's possible. And also just, you know, huge potential here for new parks, the natural geological formation with the rock outcrop. This is right along Carling, and Chair, we're getting a lot of development right from Bronson, right down to Carling, as you know, to Preston and beyond. So that's going to be a major corridor hub. It already is now, but it'll be, you know, a much larger corridor with much increased transit service in the future. And this is one of the housing typologies that we're going to see on there, which is these high rises. This one has done a great job of, I think, being more human scale in nature, and appreciate the work of staff and the applicant and my office in particular. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Are the report recommendations carried?
Carried.
Carried. Thank you. Okay, we will move on to item number 5, zoning bylaw amendment for 200 Baribeau Street in Rideau Vanier. We have a number of delegations. We will begin with a staff presentation from the planner, Jean-Charles Renaud, and then a presentation from the applicant, and then we'll go to the delegations. So starting with the staff presentation. Good morning, JC.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you very much. So today we're dealing with a zoning bylaw amendment at 200 Baribeau Street, as said, une modification au règlement de zonage au 200 rue Baribeau. Next slide, please. So the property is located within the Vanier neighborhood. Next slide, please. More specifically, north of the Vanier Parkway, near the intersection or at the intersection of Landry Street and Baribeau Street. Next slide, please. Here are a few pictures for context. So the top left picture is shows the site at the intersection of Landry and Baribeau, looking southwest, and the bottom right picture is the site in question from the perspective of Baribeau Street, looking north. Next slide, please. In yellow on this site, so we see a bird's eye view of the area. So the site in yellow, the Carillon Street at the bottom, as well as the Maya private neighborhood on the left-hand side. And we also see the existing Saint-Ambroise Park at to the left of the site as well. Next slide, please. Here we see the existing zoning on the property. It's currently zoned minor institutional. It is the site of a former school which was recently demolished. It's also affected by the floodplain covered under section 58 of the zoning bylaw. It's not your standard floodplain. It's commonly known as flood fringe. Section 58 includes requirements for permitting development within these types of floodplains, provided that it's carried out in accordance with flood proofing measures and receives approval from the relevant conservation authority. Next slide, please. So the proposed zoning. The proposal is for a planned unit development consisting of 85 townhouse dwelling units accessed via internal private streets. The proposal seeks to rezone the property to 2 separate zones. Top left of the map, you see the open space zone that is proposed to coincide with the park, the addition to the existing Saint-Ambroise Park. And the remainder of the site is to be proposed to be rezoned to an R4 UA with a site-specific exception, which would introduce a reduction in front corner and rear yard setbacks, an increase to the interior side yard setback, a reduction to permitted projections, reduction to the setbacks of a wall, and a garage to a private way, as well as the reduction to the minimum width of the private way in some locations. Next slide, please. This is a snapshot of the proposed site plan, which I will leave the applicant to provide a bit more detail on. But you see the internal streets having access to Landry and Baribeau, with some internal streets being covered in pavers and some key pinch points to amplify the pedestrian experience in some locations. Next slide, please. The proposed landscaping plan, which shows trees along the park, some trees along the street edges, and internal to the site as well. Next slide, please. So the proposal is consistent with official plan policies, namely Section 2.2 managing growth and Section 2.5 building livable communities. It's also consistent with Section 4817, which identifies the area as a 2-zone floodplain policy, where development is permitted, where permission is obtained from the Conservation Authority. And also the proposal, or the proposed zone, which is R4 UA, is consistent with other zoning categories seen throughout the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to the applicant. We have Christine McQuaig and Kevin McMahon for a presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just waiting for my presentation to be pulled up on the screen. Fantastic, thank you. So good morning, everyone. I see it's almost afternoon. Members of Planning Committee, my name is Christine McQuaig with Q9 Planning and Design, a planning consultant that will be giving you a brief overview of what's known as Dominion Village at 200 Baribeau by Park River Properties. Next slide, please. As JC had highlighted, this site is located in Vanier. It's a former school site located south of Beechwood, north of Vanier Parkway, and east of Kingsview Park. This proximity to Beechwood Avenue and Vanier Parkway provides access to transit and amenities. To the left of the proposed development is an existing, or the existing Mayor private planned unit development. This site is otherwise surrounded by low-rise residential in a mix of singles and multi-unit rentals in various forms. Next slide, please. Also, as noted, the site is currently zoned minor institutional. It's also identified as an area of reduced flood risk, meaning that it's afforded protection by existing berms. And we have had significant consultation with the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority, and they are supportive of the development, specifically because the institutional zone is actually not permitted in the floodplain overlay, whereas residential is. Next slide, please. So as noted, the proposed development would contain 85 units in a mix of townhome styles. The focus of the project was to offer that ground-oriented urban living that would be an alternative to an apartment living sort of setup. Next slide, please. So these are some renders of the project to illustrate the quality of the urban design being proposed. There's a mix of textures, articulation, and colors. No unit driveways are proposed for Landry or Baraboo, allowing that space for street parking as needed to maximize landscape, people first spaces such as front porches, and all of this facing towards the existing community. Next slide, please. And this would be a view looking into the development from Landry, and you can see the balconies, soft landscaping, the proposed trees, and the pedestrian spaces are prominent. Next slide, please. Or the next couple of slides, there's some additional renders, so we can kind of move through those. Next slide. That's, and thank you. Next slide, please. This is the view from the internal facing towards the park, and it would be of the back-to-back units. What we had provided is garages that are set back with front porches that are prominent, as well as balconies. And this is to ensure that the pedestrian spaces and the front porches and the architectural elements of the building are made prominent and not the garages, which is why they are inset for this proposal. Next slide, please. So just getting into the numbers really quick, as I noted, there's 85 units and it's made up of back-to-back towns, rear lane towns, and traditional towns. Each unit has a garage, as these are slab on grade units, and the team felt that garages were important spaces that can be used as parking or storage depending on the end user's needs. And as of course, as needs change over time and transit improves in general areas of the city, this allows suitable flexibility for the site and the units. In consultations with the community, there were those who felt that there was too much parking, and conversely, there were those who felt there was not enough parking. Given the site's location, we felt that the proposed parking arrangement was balanced. There are additional 3 visitor parking spaces within the development itself. And in terms of the parkland, there is a required dedication of 0.127 hectares. The proposed park expansion is going to be 0.1 hectares, with the remaining as cash in lieu that will be put towards the actual construction of the park concurrently with the development of the project, so that it's all developed as one cohesive community. And for the entirety of the site, we have proposed 127 large species trees. There's currently about 20 on the site right now. So there will be a significant greater number of trees on this site, which will contribute to the city's canopy. Next slide, please. As identified by staff, this project requires a zoning amendment to rezone the lands from institutional to R4 UA, which is consistent with the abutting zone to the south of this development, along with some site-specific exception provisions, and site plan control has been proceeding concurrently, and we are still moving through that process. Next slide, please. So this is a list of these site-specific exceptions for the proposed zoning amendment. They were also in the staff report. And as I noted previously, Planning Committee for this particular project, the exception provisions have been tailored quite specifically to this development, which does include an increase to the interior yard setback, which would be for the units facing abutting mayor or private, in order to maintain and ensure that we have that sufficient rear yard amenity conditions. I won't go through them in detail, but they are available to read through. Next slide, please. As noted, there's 3 townhome types that are going to be available. This is simply the breakdown of their sizes and how many of each. Next slide, please. The key objectives for this project were to provide quality architecture, enhance the streetscape, provide much needed new housing, and enlarge the existing park and develop it with input from the community for a functional space. Next slide, please. So this is an image of the a colored version of the site plan, which highlights some key views. I will end on this slide, as this is a suitable slide to conclude on, but I do want to highlight that this project provided an engagement website for residents to share their thoughts and to discuss the project and be kept aware of the status. We had an open line of communication with a dedicated email and phone number that was managed by Park River Properties, as well as a public information session, a survey of residents' thoughts and positions, as well as St. Ambrose Working Group and communication with the Vanier Community Association. And then finally, before I conclude, I do want to acknowledge we're in discussion with Councillor Fleury's office, and we are aware of the site plan control items that have been raised. And absolutely, we are very much continuing to work closely with staff, the community, and the councillor's office as we proceed through the site plan control process. And we can meet offline to engage in those discussions continually as well. Thank you very much. And myself is available for questions, as well as Kevin McMahon of Park River Properties. And also on the line is Barry Hoban, Hugo Latre, and there was someone online from CSW as the landscape architect, but I believe they had to drop off. So I will do my best to answer any landscape related questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Christine. We will come back to you after our delegations. So let's move on to our public delegations. There are 5 registered. Up first is David Pritchard, and then Chris Greenshields, and then Arturo Maki. So David Pritchard is up first.
Chair, I don't see David Pritchard on the line, although I noticed that one of the attendees has their hand up. Not sure if you mind that we check if that's. Oh.
Let's go to Chris Greenshields. I can see Chris, or Chris's forehead on our screen right now. Good morning, Chris. And Eric, if you can check on David Pritchard during Chris's presentation.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. The Vanier Community Association has been actively engaged on this application, and from the start has been concerned about an apparent failure in the city's implementation of the official plan concerning this former school and City of Vanier Park. It was disappointing to learn that the city failed in its obligation, as we saw it, under the provincial policy statement and the official plan, specifically paragraph 2.5.3 concerning school closures. There was no effort in this case to consult the community about the future use as per the official plan. We don't blame the applicant for this failure, but it did motivate the community to seek a rezoning from institutional use that would ensure maximum public benefit and consistency with the new R4 zoning regime. It was an issue that VCA raised in its submissions to the city on the new OP, and we called for a future freeze on such properties, as this committee recently approved for the revised Rockcliffe Park secondary plan. We looked to a Vanier secondary plan together with council's direction to staff for a public lands strategy to provide a similar approach. The staff report and recommendations to provide extensive exemptions to the R4 bylaw for this project, together with the city's turn down of a VCA call for a maximum park dedication in land to mitigate the loss of the previous park space, a shortage in Vanier, were disappointing and even disconcerting. First slide, please. Why does the city advocate for a reduced street frontage setback as if more trees along Vanier streets should be sacrificed to the city's apparent support for a more urban feel in Vanier, as suggested in the report? The failure to take into account meaningful planning to address this development on Vanier's floodplain confirms the recognition of this committee on the need to include a review of floodplain policies as part of a Vanier secondary plan. The need for compliance with setback requirements under the bylaw, in our view, is obvious, especially in this context. Privacy protection afforded by the bylaw related to balcony protections to minimize impacts on adjoining residential neighborhoods should also be a condition for this development. Next slide, please. Here is the VCA proposal. You have all received a useful analysis of these issues in a recent letter from my private residents, and you will hear more from other residents speaking today. We urge you to ensure adherence to the bylaw provisions, especially those affecting the perimeter of the project, to enhance Vanier's highly dense inner urban public realm, permit tree planting, including along public streets, so important for a floodplain, and minimize impacts on adjacent residents. If the setback exceptions proposed by the city are accepted, you are undermining the credibility of the new R4 regime you approved late last year. Finally, the new OP stresses the need for more parks, particularly in neighborhoods like Vanier, and to see added land for this purpose. The VCA urges this committee to ensure that there is full compliance with the park dedication provision in terms of land. Even with these corrections, the VCA considers the site plan control process will be important to future enhance and mitigate the project's impacts for Vanier residents and to the climate, especially in construction on a floodplain. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you, Chris. Are there any questions from committee for Chris? I'm seeing none. So thank you, Chris, for your presentation this morning and for your written submissions from the VCA. We have David Pritchard on the line now. So we'll go to David next. Good morning, David, or good afternoon.
Morning
David.
to you all. My specific, I would point out that there was some confusion because I'm using my wife's computer. She's teaching currently engineering as a part of her engineering course at Carleton. She was also on the National Research Council Building Codes Committee, which doesn't qualify me for anything at all, but she did review the proponents' things, particularly with slab on grade. So I'll defer to her professional opinion that it does meet engineering standards. My concern at the time, and subsequently addressed by the proponents, was the amount of parking and traffic. I was content, I believe they reduced it by 2 units to allow for more space. I am again concerned because of the rather than reduction in lanes on Montreal Road. We have been in contact with the city and in particular Councillor Fleury's office. I'm on Montfort, just a block away. It is not unusual to see cars far in excess of the speed. In fact, I saw one the other way doing 54 kilometers in a 30 zone and then ran the stop sign. Unfortunately, there does seem to be, for all the regulations and things, there does seem to be a lack of enforcement. As I see the plan, the entrance to this development will come straight down Montfort Street. And with the increased traffic on Montfort Street, it now places residents at risk, as far as I'm concerned. This is not designed as a thoroughfare, it is designed as a residential neighborhood. Further to that, I would point out, there is mention about the 15-minute walk. You will see no major stores within a block or two from major intersections such as the 417 because of transportation. They're shutting down, I understand, the metro market. A current transport truck will come in at probably 53 plus, so you're looking at 60 feet, and they're not negotiating urban streets. But I'll just leave that with you. Where my concern also lies is we now see, as I say, they're talking about the metro store becoming a condo. There's new condos on Beechwood. There's another block that they're developing. There's new condos at all along the neighborhood down at MacArthur on Vanier. I am concerned, and this is one of the things in talking to a variety of the leading engineers in Canada that I've met through my wife, infrastructure. You're putting thousands of new people in here. Has anybody contacted or made arrangements with the province about increasing the availability of services at Montfort Hospital? As far as I'm concerned, I might get on my rag about Ottawa is perhaps the worst city I know of for ableism. The complete lack of designated handicap parking spots in Ottawa floors me, but that's another issue. I can go needing a walker to get around. There's no place in Vanier I can get to without a car. 20% of the city, it has something of disabled. So I know this doesn't considerably, is not part of your consideration directly. However, I am concerned that all this new building, this project in particular, is now going to place stress on local services. The nearest place I can go for groceries is now the MacArthur, if the metro closes, is now the Loblaw is down in MacArthur. And I and my wife can't do that without using a car. So anyway, that's my 2 cents worth. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, David, for your comments. Are there any questions for David from committee members? I am seeing none. Thank you, David, for joining us. Our next speaker is Arturo Maki, followed by Nicole Cars and Michael Armstrong. Arturo, good morning.
Well, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, thank you for pronouncing my name properly. So my name is Arturo Maki, and I'll be presenting on behalf of my neighbors Alan Mayer Private. So importantly, I would first like to say that we believe this housing and park extension project will be a net benefit to the community. But considering the existing land zoning context, we recommend the following adjustments. Oh, did you put the first slide on, please, Eric? Yeah, sorry. Okay, but considering the existing land context, we recommend the following adjustments to the site perimeters, to the balcony projections, and to the park extensions. So all these recommendations numerically match those of the Vanier Community Association, and our thoughts will be explained in the following slides. Next slide, please. Next slide, Eric. Yeah, merci. Okay, so in regards to the setbacks, well, there's a negative impact on overlook for the Carillon and Mayer private residents and on the streetscapes of Landry and Barryville streets. So the applicant's solution is primarily via landscaping. However, the viability of the solution due to the reduced setbacks along Landry and Barryville streets is unclear. And you can see it from the previous images that the person showed. Okay? And it's even less clear for the Carillon residents since the reduced rear yard setback also have a 2-meter balcony projection and a 2-meter planting offset, leaving very little room for the landscaping. For the Mayer private residents, the setbacks are greater, but then the effectiveness of the solution is unclear, right? And the tree growth rate, as well as the height at canopy and canopy at maturity are unspecified. So we don't really know when the overlook will be diminished, and if the final tree height just shifts the problem towards shadowing. But most importantly on this, the ownership and the responsibility of the tree maintenance and sustainability are unclear. If the intent is for the condominium corporation to take legal responsibility via an easement, for example, then this information needs to be explicit. So the conclusion here is overall for us, the viability and sustainability of this landscape solution has not been demonstrated beyond reasonable doubt. Next slide, please. So in regards to the setbacks and the balcony projection, the applicant performed a similarity analysis based on neighborhood housing as a justification. So for new units positioned further within the site where there's no previous context, then it's reasonable to use comparable housing further in the neighborhood as precedents. However, not for the new units positioned at the site perimeter, right? It's the abutting lots that experience a direct local impact. So they're the ones that should be the comparable housing units. So if you take that frame of mind, then the Mayer private residents have a rear yard setback all above 8.8 meters. There's a 1.2 meter easement for access and egress. There is no balcony, just a landing and stairs to privately enjoy the rear yard. And privately is a key word here. As you can see, the Carillon residents have even greater rear yard setbacks. Next slide, please. So if you consider that local context at the site perimeter is what matters, then really from a current resident perspective, what you're looking at is a new neighbor is equivalent to a single low-rise infill housing. So if that's the case, in that regards, when it comes to the balcony projection, our ward councillor stated that for all new development, rear yard balconies on lots less than 100 feet in depth can project a maximum of 1.2 meters, but may not project at all where a rear yard is less than 6 meters in depth. So those numbers, these specifications are similar to the recommendations proposed on that first slide. Next slide, please. Okay, so now in regards to the park extension, we understand that this application may be about land development, but we also need to consider the housing and site plan design. Why is that? Well, housing units are relatively large in order to allow families to grow, which is one of the main goals of this project. But by design, the private outdoor space is limited to the balcony throughout the entire site. There is no yard space for children to run and play, which then pushes these activities into public green space. As such, due to this specific housing design, the park extension should be at least at its minimum value of 0.12 acres, right? Of note, such outdoor space design may ultimately be how many future redevelopment projects occur in central urban areas. So for example, what I have in that dotted line is a suggested design by the applicant on a neighboring lot in Carillon Street, and other developers may do similarly. But if that's the case, it gives even more reason to maximize that public green space use and have it at its full extent.
Arturo, that's your time if you could wrap up.
Yeah, I'm done. It's the last slide. Next slide. So yeah, in summary, again, if we believe in the net benefit of the project, but we also believe that a better overall design can be possible. So if you agree with the discussion points, we request that you pass a motion to adjust the site perimeter setbacks, the balcony projections, and the park extension according to our and the Venue Community Association recommendations. Thank you for your consideration. Any questions? I really tried to do 5 minutes, but an academic talks like you want.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions for Arturo? I'm seeing none. So thanks for your presentation today.
Okay, thank you.
And next we'll go to Nicole Cars and Michael Armstrong, who've registered together to speak.
Yeah, hi. We don't really have anything to add. We're actually part of the with Arturo, and we're just kind of here in case something was missed or we felt that something was missed. However, we would like to sort of reinforce what he said, and that we feel that the especially with on the abutting properties along Mayor Private and Carillon, that the balcony projections and the rear yard setbacks are unacceptable, and that the sort of mitigation measures that have been proposed by the applicant and also noted in the submission are just not acceptable, and there's no guarantee that they're actually going to exist or continue to exist. We also feel the same way with Arturo and the VCA, that given the fact there is such little accessible green space within the proposed development, that the park space should be at minimum the maximum proposed, if not more. I don't really have anything else to add, but I think Arturo did a wonderful job. Anyways, thanks.
Okay, thank you. I'll just look to the committee in case there's any questions for you, Michael. And I'm seeing none. So our last speaker is also from the Mayor Private Residence Group, Dan Dorner. Is Dan with us?
He is online, Chair.
Okay, I'm here now.
Hi, Dan.
Hi. I don't have really anything more to add other than the Mayor Private Residence Group, which I'm the chair of, has more than the number of people who spoke today or are present today as well. We have people who, are backing on to the proposed development, as well as other residents of the street who are concerned about the park size because of the lack of space for children to play on the new development and how it's going to impact on the local park, which already is quite small. And so the minimum park space or the less than minimum park space provided is an issue. Traffic is something else that came up in discussions, and we're pleased that the councillor has proposed that it be a one-way street going from Betterbow through to Laundry, but I guess that might cause problems for people on Montfort. And our concern was that the Mayor Private is already used as a cut through from Laundry through to Vanier Parkway. And this could well increase the amount of traffic coming through there. And it is a private street that we have. And we pay fees from our, our own condominium group to, cover costs of repairs and snow removal, et cetera, to that street. So we would like to see that there be a traffic study done after the development is out built so we can see the traffic flows at that point. But I guess our main concern really is the impact that it will be on our private space. And Arturo's covered that, Mike's covered that as well. We use our private space in the back as our place for relaxation. It's a private space for us to, have barbecues and for our kids to play, grandchildren to come and play in our backyards and so on. And we feel that's going to be quite negatively impacted by the way the development is set up now, with the no guarantees of the size of the trees that might grow, they're going to be used, could well exceed the height of the townhouses. Some of them are 15 meters, projected to grow to and so on. The area taken up by those trees too is going to be quite large. So there could well be an impact, shadowing impact on us by those trees. And there's no guarantees that they will be maintained. So those are the main concerns that we have.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Are there any questions from the committee for Dan? I'm seeing none. So thank you, Dan, for joining us today. Thank you to all the residents for your patience this morning. It's been a long meeting. Councillor Fleury, did you have a question for Dan or for the applicant? I see your hand just went up. Okay.
Oh, Mr. Chair, it's basically to raise and address the outstanding points, and just looking for applicant in the city to confirm that those items can be worked through site plan.
Okay, so we're going to go now to questions for the applicant. So if you want to begin there, Councillor Fleury, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, and good morning, Kevin and Christine. I know you've heard from residents from the city and myself over the last year, basically relating to a number of things, and appreciate the changes that were brought forward to the application. Could you maybe speak to some of your objectives in terms of the rear yard elements that are often raised by residents as concerns along Mayal Private and Carillon specifically? I know it's been an ongoing conversation between all parties here, so I wonder if you could propose how you see that this application is minimizing those impacts from early community feedback.
Thank you, Councillor Fleury. So through you, Mr. Chair, Councillor Fleury is correct. It has been an ongoing conversation. Based on the site plans and the presentations that I had seen from the community, some of them were a bit dated, though I do believe we've had Mr. McMahon has had communication with the community association, and there have been updated plans. The rear yard setbacks at both facing Mayor private development as well as facing south on Carillon have been increased from the original proposal that was submitted, and we've gone back and forth with staff and forestry on those matters, as well as urban design in a number of instances. And with specific regard to the Mayor private rear yard abutting conditions, those setbacks are now ranging from 6.47 meters to upwards of 7.67 meters. So in cases for, I'd have to check the number of units, but they do meet that sort of bylaw typical 7.5 meters. And then with the buffer of trees, that affords the privacy and also contributes to tree canopy within the city. They are fast-growing trees, and so they should be sure to establish, and it has been reviewed in detail with the landscape architect at CSW to ensure that they are, suitably positioned in order to establish themselves and grow. And the proposal with regards to the balconies, the reason why we had chosen this route is that by the nature of the grading for this particular site, if there were at grade amenity spaces, it would present more of a privacy consideration because you would be looking below the canopy of the proposed trees, whereas the location of the balcony ensures that the tree canopies would actually create that privacy between both rear yard amenity users. So that was the proposal as to the rationale as to why we chose to go with that particular avenue, as to have the trees buffered and the balcony spaces. I will reach out to Mr. McMahon and see if he has anything further to add to that conversation.
No, I think you covered everything. I think our initial position was based off of the rear yard setbacks required for the planned unit development based on the lot depth, which I believe is 4 meters. And through consultation, that was became clear that we needed to do more than that. And so we've done the best we can while trying to retain a viable development that can accommodate a wide range of housing types.
Okay, and then just as a follow-up, there continues to be concern relating to the availability of visitor parking, particularly, and I know we have to work through those elements from sidewalk width to fire lane requirements, but I'd love for us to work on finding some on-street spots within the private, and just looking for your agreement that would be that'd be discussed in the next phase from your perspectives.
We're open to meeting with staff and your office as well to discuss those ongoing site plan control issues. The current visitor parking that's provided within the development is those 3 additional spaces, in addition to the driveway spaces that are being proposed. And to my understanding, there are on-street parking spaces permitted both on Baraboo and on Landry as well. We want to make sure in those discussions going forward that we do achieve a balance of parking, housing, and landscaping, especially in consideration of current climate considerations for the city and going forward, and improvements to transit and LRT across the city. So I just wanted to highlight that as kind of our goal moving forward on those discussions with your office and with city staff.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We don't intend to increase the hard surface or to add roadway. Quite the opposite. I think there's opportunities to increase the pedestrian realm and reduce the movement through the site. Just for further concurrence, so there are, it is unclear in some of the plans relating, we're looking for additional trees at the rear yards and for each addresses along Landry and Baraboo, and that again to you would be a site plan consideration.
That's correct. We will continue to review and find locations for additional trees. In the rear yards, I believe, I don't have the numbers directly in front of me, but I believe we're at an average of 4 trees per rear yard along the west and the south locations. There's currently proposed to be 127 large species trees. So we are looking at more than 1 tree on average per unit for this 85 unit development. I think there's 8 additional trees beyond that 127, but they're not classified as large species trees. So there is over 130 trees being proposed. So I do want to flag that, but we are certainly, we will work with CSW, we will work with staff and see where we can provide additional trees in the front yards and anywhere else in the development that they can be located, whether they be small or large.
Yeah, no, and we can take the details at our conversation. The last point relates to the blocks that really have a front entrance on Baraboo and Landry specifically. It feels really back of a building from the site plan drawings I've seen. So are the architectural renderings to soften the landscaping and look at materials and stuff along that laneway also part of the site plan considerations?
Certainly. Mr. Hoban from Hoban's office is available on the call, but that architectural design has been detailed and enhanced throughout this process. As I mentioned in my presentation, the garages have been set back so that we really ensure that the prominence of the porches and the balconies are the first thing that you really are drawn to. Mr. Hoban, I will defer to you if you want to add on to that at all.
Am I muted or unmuted?
You're good.
Okay, I think it's important to actually position this project and take it up to 20,000 feet. You know, we're seeing a lot of projects in established neighborhoods where we're looking at low-rise apartment buildings or mid-rise apartment buildings. What we're trying to do with this scheme is basically a ground-oriented, owner-occupied project. And I can guarantee you there are very, very few projects like this being proposed within the urban area. And so, you know, all of the things that I hear mentioned about green space, about parking, about all of those things basically are the tension points when you actually want to do a ground-oriented freehold scheme within an urban area. So you can't win on every front. So Christine and others have pointed out how we've animated the street by facing all of the units on Laundry and Barrowboat to the street. So you can't have a green space on one side and then basically not have some cost on the other side. So we'd speak to Councillor Fleury's comment about the backside of those units. Yeah, of course, the backside basically suffers because you put the garage on that side, but the other side is animated. And the other part of that is it frees up the street for street parking, which is, you know, something that's, believe it or not, it's in demand. So, I mean, in all these things, yeah, are we saying it's the perfect suburban model where we have tons of green space and we have, you know, over amount of parking? No. But we're dealing with an urban area. We're trying to create density, which is, I think, entirely consistent with the new official plan, and certainly the notion of intensifying within existing neighborhoods without relying on mid to high-rise development. So that would be my only comment. Obviously, the option to introduce street trees, et cetera, is always there. You have to also keep in mind that when you're doing these types of projects, low-rise, that we have to accommodate a number of technical and engineering things, not the least of which is fire route that has to be able to be planned through this community. And the notion of providing enough space, in fact, to have parking and or visitor parking within the development, not relying on the streets that are on the outside. So that's my quick overview. I mean, it's as there's work that we can do in terms of improving landscaping, etc. But I think upon reflection, every councillor who is in this ward looking at their own ward would kind of wonder how, in fact, do we do this kind of development in other places in the city? My comments.
Hey, Mr. Chair, again, I think we went probably too much in depth here, but I am looking for all those items to be discussed as part of the site plan, and wanted to confirm that they were up for discussion.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Fleury. Councillor Menard.
Thanks, Chair. I'll be quick. There's a lot to like in this proposal that I've seen. I think the piece that needs more discussion here is, as Councillor Fleury points out, how cars work through the site and the amount of parking spaces. So I just want to get the team to confirm the parking. I understand there's 85 resident parking spaces that are proposed here, which is over double what is required, and 88 visitor parking spaces, which is more than 11 times what's required. So that's 173 parking spaces where the bylaw only calls for 48 in a fairly urban core neighborhood. I just want to confirm with the team that is currently the projection. This may change in site plan, but I just wanted to hear from you on that point.
Councillor Menard, was that question directed to myself?
Yes.
Staff? Correct. So through you, Mr. Chair, the 85 units all do have garages, and so that would constitute a single parking space for those garages. 80 of the units also have a driveway space, and that is sort of an incidental space required as the PUD provisions necessitate the building to be set back from the private way. And so that space between the private way and the garage is incidentally a driveway space. 5 of the 85 units, the space between the garage and the private way is less than what's required in the planned unit development provisions. And so those 5 spaces are technically, there are no driveway spaces at those locations. And then there are the 3 additional visitor spaces within the development itself at the southwest end of the site. And so if we were to abide by the zoning bylaw requirements, about half of the units would not have a garage or parking. And I think from what we've heard in the community that would not be desirable. So we are trying to achieve a balance, understanding that the garages have the ability to be used for parking as needed for residents, or they may use it as storage, which some of us in Ottawa, especially in the winter conditions, typically do use garages for either parking and storage or one or the other. So we wanted to ensure that flexibility was there. So I hope that gives you some clarity.
Yeah, I mean, it helps. Thank you. I think there's 2 things I would just mention to yourself and Councillor Fleury when you're having this further discussion. One is that it would be good to have a transit stop right at the doorstep here. You're close to transit services here. That's the first. And then the second is a lot of that parking space could be used for housing space. If in a design that helps to achieve that missing middle housing we're looking for. So I still think there's too much parking here personally. Maybe Councillor Fleury's suggestion around how the site works in terms of that one way and other pieces can be accommodated. But I think you should be looking to reduce the parking here and increase the housing unit potential personally from our own official plan goals and other things that we're trying to accomplish in the city. So appreciate the rest of the proposal. It's a good proposal, and just wanted to add those comments. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions for the applicant from committee? All right, thanks very much for the presentation and the answers. We'll move now to questions for staff. Councillor Fleury.
Mr. Chair, I'll ask for your indulgence, a few questions to staff and then wrap up comments if that works. JC and Doug, I know that you've been on this proposal for a number of, if not a year or so. Could you clarify the concerns from residents along Mayal Private and Carillon as it relates to the rear yard setback, and how the current proposal meets or doesn't meet the planning policy intents? You've heard from delegations and we've seen through email those concerns, and just want for the record to formalize what the city's perspective is on those rear yard conditions.
Sure. Through you, Mr. Chair, as it was stated by the applicant, the rear yard setbacks along Carillon and along Mayal Private were increased through the review process from what they were originally submitted as. Most of the focus was on the Mayal Private side of things, given their close proximity of the existing buildings, and staff feel that the increase that was granted to those rear yards, which also had a positive impact on the size of the park next door, work together to provide an adequate setback at the rear yards. The Carillon side of the matter, the way we looked at it, the Carillon properties currently benefit from a very deep rear yard. Therefore, the proposed rear yard setbacks along the Carillon properties are deemed to be acceptable given the context.
Okay, and I know obviously that will continue to be of concern to neighbors. The other question or comment relates to the city's protection of the parkland, and I obviously, JC, you've done the work to protect and expand Saint-Ambroise Park and get cash in lieu of parkland. But I think pre to that, the community association was really wondering why the city hadn't put its hand on the school property. And I'd love to understand what policy environment we have in that regards.
Mr. Chair, with respect to disposal of school sites, it's my understanding that there's a hierarchy, and the city would have the opportunity to obtain that, but another like a public site. But it's up to council to decide if that will become a city asset or not, and then if not, it gets offered off to the private sector for development. But it would be up to council to have enough funds set aside for the purchase of any school sites. But one thing to keep in mind, though, and when something like that does go to the private sector, it is looked from a policy perspective to be used for housing, and that's what's happening here. We have an opportunity to put in, I think it's 85 new units, as mentioned, ground-oriented units within the area that will help us meet our overall policy goals with respect to the official plan. So, in the bigger view, it does meet the overall policy direction for development in this area and cities and council's desires.
Okay, and then the final question to staff on this, Mr. Chair, relates to the items that are outstanding. So trees at the front, trees at the back, some of the design concerns along those. What would be back? What would be all of the back of those townhouses along Landry and Baribeau, kind of those alleyways, and then some of the transportation elements, particularly width of sidewalks. Those are all elements that we can discuss at the next phase of the site plan.
Mr. Chair, that is correct. Those are all items that are still on the table. We've discussed them with the applicant throughout the review of the site plan, but we can definitely take a further look at it to see if any further improvements can be made.
Okay, thank you. So just as a final comment, committee and chair, I am supportive of the project. This is the old Alul Beit school has been demolished a few months ago, which was favorable. We didn't want a vacant building. What is proposed is interesting. We could be, the applicant could have been seeking much greater heights here, as we have at 70 and 90 Landry for the site. And I think the hope of seeing more families move into Vanier in this environment is very, very positive. There are outstanding elements that I don't want to neglect, and you've heard me state that I will be pursuing those at site plan committee. I might need your help. If we can advance it, I might pull delegated authority and come back to you in relations to some of those objectives. Hopefully we don't get there. One of the delegations did speak to cut through Mayal Private, which is the neighboring development. I want to raise that. It is there are a number of community concerns of cut through the community from Montreal Road to the Vanier Parkway particularly. But I do want to raise for record, Mayal Private Development is a network of 4 condo boards, and I've repeatedly brought to their attention their need to agree on a traffic mitigation aspects within their private street network. We've have Phil Landry and Emergency Services as written with the framework to bring forward road closures or limitations to the road closures. So I will once again reiterate that to the 5 condo boards within Mayal Private, that those cut through issues can be resolved by the condo board, and the city is supportive within the framework that was provided in writing. So that doesn't mitigate some of the cut through concerns we have for this application, but it does, I did want to set that for record. So again, Mr. Chair, I am supportive of the application. I think there are a lot of positive here, including additional parkland, increasing of Saint-Ambroise Park, and there are some outstanding elements that we are looking forward to resolve through site plan. So I'll leave it in committee's hands, and again, I want to thank the community and the applicant for their submission today. I think from where they started to the community engagement to where we're at today, we're in a very interesting spot, and yes, there continues to be some elements to finalize. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Fleury. And yes, lots of time to meet and to resolve some of the outstanding issues. This wouldn't rise to council until the end of January, first meeting of the new year. We have a technical amendment that Councillor Moffat is going to introduce on this item.
Thank you. So whereas report ACS 2021 PIEPS 0104 recommends approval of a zoning bylaw amendment for 200 Barrowbow Streets to permit a planned unit development, and whereas inconsistencies between the zoning details in document 1 location map and document 2 details of recommended zoning have been identified, specifically that areas A and B to be rezoned are switched in document 2. Therefore be it resolved that planning committee amend document 2 details of recommended zoning by deleting sections 1 and 2 and replacing them with the following. 1, area A shown on document 1 to be rezoned from I1A to R4 UA quadruple X. 2, area B shown on document 1 to be rezoned from I1A to O1. Be it further resolved that pursuant to the Planning Act subsection 3417, no further notice be given.
Thank you, Chair Moffat. On the technical amendment, is that carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Carried, thank you. And then on the main report as amended, is that carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Carried. Thank you. Okay, I believe that was our last item. There was the 471 Terry Fox Drive we already dealt with. That was Laurel McCrate's pet project. Are there any in-camera items? I'm seeing none. Are there any notices of motion for a future meeting? None. Inquiries. I believe there is one inquiry.
Yeah, Chair, I think I might be putting an inquiry forward for Councillor McKenney.
I believe you are. There it is.
I remembered that correctly. So on behalf of Councillor McKenney, radon is a naturally occurring gas which is low risk outdoors but can accumulate in buildings, and elevated radon levels present an increased risk of lung cancer. Building Code Services recently released guidance on voluntary radon mitigation measures for the construction industry. However, voluntary measures are not sufficient. Does the City of Ottawa have a plan to introduce a mandatory radon mitigation and testing policy or program, such as the radon gas mitigation program that's been established in the city of Guelph? If not, why is the City of Ottawa not planning to implement a mandatory program addressing radon concerns in new builds?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Leeper and Councillor McKenney. We have no other business today that I'm aware of. So our next meeting is Thursday, January 27th, 2022. We've got a bit of a break, and our meeting for today is adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Glenn. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.